potent advice, and inspiration from real self-made millionaires. Welcome to The Eventual Millionaire with your host, Jaime Masters.
Hey, it's Jaime, and welcome to a select edition of Eventual Millionaire. This is where we go back and find the best of the best, the ones that you loved from the past 6-7 years. We've been doing this a long time, and there's some amazing interviews with amazing guests that you have not seen yet. So we are bringing them back. It is the Selects edition. Let us know what you think, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome to Eventual Millionaire. I am Jaime Masters, and today on the show, we have renowned author of over 40 books and one of my favorite books on the planet, Hendricks. His book, The Big Leap, is something I recommend to absolutely all of my clients. He's also written a myriad of others and is a mystery novelist too. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
It's my pleasure, Jaime. Great to talk with you.
So what I want you to do is talk about The Big Leap, number one, just because I recommend it to absolutely everyone, and it's an honor to have you.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. In fact, of all the books I've written, The Big Leap has a unique status in a way because it came out about 10 years ago, and the sales graph would go in the author's dream direction, just straight up. So it sells more today than it did when it first came out. And so I really appreciate all of you for spreading the word. Yes, The Big Leap is really about two things that I began to study in earnest about 30 or 35 years ago. And then gradually, I always say when people ask me, how long did it take to write The Big Leap? I said, well, it took me 30 years to think about it and a year to write it. So it was something I started thinking about. Basically, I noticed something in my own life that I started calling the upper limit problem, that I would get to a certain level of feeling good or a certain level of harmony with my then girlfriend or a certain level of success in my work. And then something would happen that would kind of knock me back down to my previous level of being. You know, like I would eat well for 3 days in a row, and then I'd go out and have an extra large double pepperoni pizza, and then I'd go for a couple of days. And so I began to call this the upper limit problem. And so The Big Leap is really, first of all, how to recognize the upper limit problem in yourself and how to correct that so that you can have, instead of a approach to your growth and your prosperity, that can go in a kind of like an easy breathing fashion. And so I'm happy to say that The Big Leap, the sales of it, has actually mimicked that, because most of my books, when a book comes out, especially like if we were on Oprah with our book, Conscious Loving, for example, the book went like whoosh, and then it would die back down. And then every time they would rerun that show, whoosh. And so there was something like this sort of thing. But I like the way The Big Leap has kind of gone out by word of mouth. And so the upper limit problem. Number two, The Big Leap is about what I now call the genius spiral, which is, I used to call it the zone of genius, but I quit using that term because it's kind of limiting. A zone is a place. And I began to use the idea of a spiral because a spiral really has no end point. You can keep riding up. As a matter of fact, I got the image from my wife and I had, when we got married, we had a private wedding up on the top of a mountain just for the two of us. And then we had a more public one down, for friends and that kind of thing. But when we were on the mountaintop, we were saying our vows to each other. And this is almost 40 years ago now. Katie said, "Oh, look up." And I looked up, and there was this magnificent hawk circling around in a spiral above our heads. And as we said our vows to each other, suddenly we looked up again, and there was two hawks. And I didn't know it at the time, but hawks mate for life unless something happens to them. And so here were these two beautiful hawks circling around above us as we were doing our vows. And then when we finished, we looked up again, and they were way up in the sky, almost tiny little specks. And so this idea of a spiral, I think, took root in me. And I realized that in personal growth, you often, as you grow, it's like a spiral because you come back around and revisit themes that you visited earlier in an earlier stage of growth and enlightenment, but you have it in a whole different way now, and it may come again in a larger wave of the spiral. And so I like this idea of building our personal growth around a spiral rather than a zone. So anyway, the genius spiral is the second thing that I'm really excited about talking to people on, especially business owners, because it's been my experience. I used to come to Austin, by the way, a lot to consult with Michael Dell and the top team at Dell Computer out in Round Rock. And so I had a lot of experience with big business, but I've had a lot of experience too coaching entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs that I work with. And one of the things that is incredibly important for all business people is to take a little time off from the practical side of business and put, like we recommend, just starting with 10 minutes a day on the spiritual side of business. Because what happens is the more successful you get, oftentimes the less time you spend in the depths of yourself saying, what am I really doing here? And we work here, people will come sometime, a CEO of a company will come to be with us for 2 days or 3 days, and we work with that person all day long. There are no other people around. In those intensives, what we often find is a person who has gotten to be incredibly successful, but has left a piece of himself or herself behind. And that piece is one that needs daily visiting. So when people come here, we often ask them to start by just going in a room by themselves for 10 minutes and asking, what is my true genius? Not even trying to come up with an answer, just focusing on the question. What is my true genius? So if you keep in mind those two things, the upper limit problem and the genius spiral, that's really the essence of what's in the Big Leap and the new sequel, which is The Joy of Genius.
And this is what I absolutely adore, because now everyone's talking about the neuroscience and negative thoughts and things that are the upper limit problem. But you came out with this 10 years ago, right? And have data over and over and over from tons of people that have gone through it. So how did you, when you started doing that first book, how did you start testing the way that you counteract sort of our upper limit problem?
Well, I first started doing it in personal well-being area. I began to first focus in, because at the time I was overweight, and I'm a little over 6 feet tall and I weigh about 180. So I look athletic now, but in that days I looked like an athlete with a spare tire around the middle, and so an unnecessary tire around my middle. And I was more of a pear-shaped intellectual body than I was an athletic body.
Intellectual body, I like that.
I spent a lot of time working on my library tan in those days, So this goes back 30, 35 years ago. And I had moved to California to work on my doctorate at Stanford. And I had opportunity for the first time to eat things like real fresh vegetables. I'd been living way up in New Hampshire where, like I remember one day buying a cantaloupe for, at the time, 35 years ago, $2.50, which would be like $25 now, And,
I'm from New Hampshire and Maine, so it's hilarious. Yes, I know exactly. It's weird up there.
It's really weird in wintertime. And yes. So I always say we used to get the vegetables that the rest of America didn't want. They would come up to my...
That's funny.
But I moved to California and suddenly, wow, there's all these fresh vegetables everywhere. And I started paying attention to my well-being. And I would, like I said earlier, I would get 3 days or 4 days of really eating well and feeling good. And then I would sabotage myself. I would go out and just have to have an extra thick vanilla malt or a triple thick burger from something or other. And then I would kind of groan in my body for a day or two. And I started noticing the same thing also in my relationship with the woman I was with at the time. This was in my pre-Katie days. And so it goes back actually more than 40 years now. And so I began to notice that we would get along well for a few days, and then one of us would start an argument. And it didn't matter who it was, but something would happen that would interfere with the flow of intimacy. I think I see a head nod there. You may have noticed something like that. anybody on planet Earth who's had a relationship would pretty much have that experience. So I began to pay attention not to what we argued about, but when we argued. And I started realizing that we tended to argue on Friday, late afternoon Friday, and late afternoon on Sunday. And I figured out that, oh, here we got the weekend coming up. We're not sure how we're going to be with each other, but we know how to argue. And so we would kind of pick these fights with each other, and then the rest of the weekend. So that was a key step, because I began to think, okay, what the job is to extend the amount of time I'm feeling good, and to extend the amount of time I'm feeling that close connection. And so I began to focus more on that than on the content of any issue, because I realized it didn't really matter how I sabotaged my diet. I could do it by getting a cold and thinking, well, I better eat something, that nurtures me. Or I could do it by just, like I remember losing my head one day walking past an ice cream store. I'd lost about 35 pounds and I was feeling really good. And I passed this ice cream store and I saw this family eating a banana split. I just had to have it. The next thing it was the 20-minute high of my life, but then halfway down the block, clunk. And so that's the upper limit problem in action. And I ask people to pay attention to it in the simple things of life first, like connections with your beloveds and how you feel in your body and things like that. Ultimately, though, everything in the upper limit problem is a way we keep ourselves from experiencing our true genius, our true creativity. Because what happens is if people can keep hitting their upper limit and struggling with that and sabotage, go high, go low, what happens is that distracts everybody from asking yourself, what is my true genius? And how can I express it in the world in a way that makes the greatest contribution? To me, life is at its best when I'm doing what I love to do, and it also makes the largest contribution. And so that's really what we teach.
Oh, and I love this too, especially in the guise of entrepreneurship, because you've seen that meme online where it's like entrepreneurship looks like this, and it's a graph that's like up and down and up and down and up and down, right? And what you're saying is that when we hit those ups, right, and maybe not on a daily to day basis, because we're all going to sort of hit that, that we can even it out a little bit better. So when I think about this, everybody wants to live in their genius, but there's cash flow issues and this issues and that issues. So it makes it difficult to put into practice. What do you say to people that come to you, especially after reading your book and going, you're a genius, I love this, I want to do more of this, but all the excuses in the world?
Yes, well, when you were saying that, I had an image come to mind of a young man that I did some coaching with. He was in his early 30s, and he was full of good ideas. He needed a lot of focus, so we worked on focus. But what really did the trick, in fact, I want to illustrate that with what not to do.
Okay.
What not to do is more and more of what already isn't working.
Darn it. You got me. No.
and the same thing with time. There's never enough time to do what you don't really want to do anyway. And so if you understand that your time is your most precious commodity, where do I want to focus my time? And the young man that I was referring to, as we homed in on more and more and more of his genius, it also had to do with what he most loved to do, which was this act of personal transformation with people, a moment where a person's face lights up. And I must say that's to this day one of the most wonderful things in life is when I see somebody let go of an upper limit and, oh, I don't have to keep doing it that way. I see a new possibility. I could live on that, I think. And yet in life teaches us almost the opposite, to distract yourself and not focus in on what do you most love to do. When I first thought of that, as a matter of fact, I can remember where I was sitting. I was sitting in an apartment in Colorado Springs. I used to be a professor there at the university in the counseling psych department. And but one time I was thinking about what really is my life purpose. And I came up with this idea. Well, what I love to do more than anything else is expand every day in my learning, expand in my ability to love and my ability to experience abundance and my ability to keep my creativity flowing. That to me is being wealthy. And so I made this vow, and I took on this idea that every day I commit to expanding in love, creativity, and abundance as I go about inspiring other people who are interested to do the same. Because to me, that contribution part of life is such a sacred thing. And very few people tell us that early in life, how good contribution actually feels. And, many of us are coming from a place of, well, gosh, I feel wounded down inside and I need mine first. But it's like I was working with a person one time on the phone who called me, who was in a state of deep depression. And he was a client that I'd seen in another state. And he called me one night and he was feeling really depressed. And I talked to him, had him do a little bit of breathing and everything, but nothing really broke through. And finally, this idea came to me. I said, before you came and talked to me on the phone, did you notice anything that caught your eye, anything that needed doing? And he said, well, I have an elderly neighbor downstairs who it's hard for her to keep her front porch clean. And I noticed it had gotten all cruddy with leaves and everything. And I said, okay, I'll stay on the phone. You run down and sweep it really quickly, like do a 2-minute quick sweep of it. So I set her on the phone. He comes back. He was totally different. Maybe it was some of the exercise of doing it, but I think it was the deeper issue of he got out of himself for a moment and offered something to the world. And, I have a good friend, Jirka Recife, who founded the company Gaia, Gaia.com, which is a very great media company. Before that, he founded Corporate Express and did a lot of mergers and acquisitions. And I think he told me once he had done 200 or 300 different mergers and acquisitions things. So he knew a lot of entrepreneurs. And one time we were walking across the street and I asked him in Boulder, Colorado, where they are. And I asked him, what's the funniest thing you've ever heard somebody say in all your years of coaching and coaching entrepreneurs and doing mergers and acquisitions? And he said, I've heard it many, many times, but the funniest thing I ever hear is, he said, I always make a point of people saying, why do you want to go in business for yourself? Or why did you want to go in business for yourself? And he said, the thing that makes him laugh when people say it is, I wanted more time for myself.
Right? Everybody's laughing right now. They're like, darn it.
This young man I was talking about, the 32-year-old, I remember talking to him about that very subject, and just pressing him on that very issue. What do you really want to get out of this? And to let him know that it really needs to be something that you're willing to think about 24 hours a day. Even, I've had some of my best business ideas. In fact, I would say like one of my 2 biggest business ideas came from when I wasn't even thinking about it. I was meditating one morning when the idea popped in my mind. My business partner in the movie side of my life, Stephen Simon, and I had kind of beat our brains against Hollywood after his movie, What Dreams May Come, came out. That's awesome. We formed a little business where we were going to produce more inspiring movies. And we kept beating our brains against the Hollywood production establishment because What Dreams May Come had lost money. And so it was, we don't want any spiritual films around here. We want comic book movies. And come back with a spiritual comic book. That's what one executive told us.
A spiritual comic book. That's great.
We should have too.
Yeah, right? It would have worked. Yeah.
But suddenly one morning in meditation in the year of 2003, suddenly this idea popped in my mind. Oh, let's hotwire around Hollywood. Let's go to the film festivals and find the inspiring movies that Hollywood won't touch, put them on DVDs. This was before streaming. Put them on DVD and put them out to people around the world. And whoosh, we launched a business, and it was almost an overnight success. I think we were profitable in our third month, something like that, and caught the attention of 3 Wall Street people who came here to find out what we were doing. And so, but that whole little thing came from this 10-second little poof at the end of meditation. Oh, why don't we do it that way? And, some part of my mind had been thinking about that for a long time and suddenly produced the solution. In one of Einstein's notebooks, if I remember correctly, he talked about a physics problem that he thought about every day for 27 years, and that is some dedicated think time.
That's insane. I guess that's sort of the question then for me. So everybody that's listening feels like they don't have enough time, right? And of course, that's a construct and all of you can go into that. But how do you actually do it? So when you have a to-do list, how do you lean into I'm so used to saying zone of genius, your genius spiral? How do you lean into that more when you have so many obligations that you said yes to for so long?
Well, it's a question of priorities. It's a question of commitment. And those are 2 words that, commitment, no change happens without heartfelt commitment. The thing that makes like 12-step groups work is that person stands up there and says, my name's John and I'm an alcoholic and here's my story. And so it's claiming who you really are and making that heartfelt commitment, whatever that heartfelt commitment is. If it's to growing a successful business, very few businesses are success. I've had several other businesses that were not successful, like the Spiritual Center.
Good, thank you. You're not all perfect.
Yes, in fact, I've had a couple that had approximately the trajectory of the Titanic. They started with great fanfare and praise, and then kept hitting the iceberg. And so, but I'm happy to say that what you should do in entrepreneuring is go more for your batting average. Like Babe Ruth didn't have a great batting average, but he hit a lot of home runs. So if you're going for home runs, be prepared to strike out a lot.
Well, I guess that's my question then too. When we have the heartfelt commitment, because you know what you're doing too, right? You have the heartfelt claiming who you are. You're in your genius as much as humanly possible, and you still fail, or potentially, I don't know if you were in your genius or not, but you still fail. How can we make sense of that?
Well, first of all, I think we need to just get a better image in our mind. I take along, in fact, sometimes when I speak to groups like young presidents and things like that, I often take along a kid's Bobo the Clown doll. It's an inflatable thing that if you hit it, it bops back up. And I say, okay, this is an entrepreneur here, and because you're never going to get where you need to get to in a straightforward path. You get knocked down, you get back up, you get knocked down. And so, it happens around here all the time, like recently one of our key assistants quit. Right. It's like it doesn't sound like a big deal,
it's huge,
but it's like having one of your tires quit,
Yes.
And so we're kind of a lean organization around here. We only have half a dozen people, and every one of them had a kind of a key function. So when one of them unplugs, but so things like that are going to happen wherever you are in the process. And I think you have to construct that resilient part of yourself. That's why we recommend body kinds of things so much. I'll tell you, as the older I get, the more appreciative I get. Like I spent an hour this morning at the gym. I do that 3 days a week, and I'm going to play golf later. And my wife and I go for a lot of walks, and we have a little electric e-bikes, and that we ride all over town with in the summertime. And, you pedal them, and then when the hill gets steep, it kicks in with electricity. And so it's perfect for my iffy knees. After 25 years of competitive squash playing and about 35 years of and skiing and then golf, my knees are sort of hanging together by a prayer. So, but it's important, I think, to keep things in motion on a physical level. And a lot of entrepreneurs completely overlook that. They get busy on charts and graphs and forget the other stuff.
Well, and that's why your perspective is really helpful, because when we're in it, it's harder to see, right? And so even if they feel like they've heartfelt claimed it like a little while ago, and then they sort of renege and they're not doing the things that are really, really important to get them in that genius where they do feel really, really good, how do they whack themselves back into it? Do you know what I mean? I feel like we get in these ruts and then we have to go, oh, well, shoot, I'm in it again. Oh, the upper limit problem again and again and again. It's over and over and over.
Well, it is in a way because of the spiral issue, because you're going to touch on the same kinds of things the further you go up the spiral. Let me give you an example. Many, many years ago, when Katie and I had been together a few years, I think, so we're talking about somewhere in the mid 80s, 83, 84, somewhere in there, before you were born, probably.
It was about when I was born, yeah.
Yeah. Back when you were born, young lady, there was a world back then. So anyway, we'd been together a couple of years, and we lived in Colorado at the time. And her parents came to visit from California and were staying at our house. And we noticed they bickered constantly. And as we thought about it, every time we'd visited them in California, the same thing had happened. But since we were coming and going, we hadn't noticed it. But when they were in our house, we noticed it was pretty much a 24-hour-a-day ping pong match of bickering with each other. And so after they left, Katie and I got down in a conversation and said, we do that more than we really need to ourselves. But look where we got this from, and because I'd grown up in the same kind of family, and they were wonderful people. That was just the way they entertained themselves, I guess. Right. And so I said, let's put a stop to that. Let's create a relationship, if you are willing, where we eliminate criticism. We thought about that. And so we made a vow to each other to eliminate criticism from our relationship. And it literally took years, because we'd get a couple of weeks in, and then one of us would, and we'd get a few more weeks in. And so we would keep returning to that commitment. So here's the point I'm making. Recommitment is just as important as the original commitment, because of the Bobo doll problem. We're going to get knocked down, and you got to get back up and center yourself in your commitment and go again. And that's not easy to do. I'm not saying in any way it's easy to do, because a few times, just personally speaking, you get depressed after something falls apart that you put your life into. It's just like in my book writing world, I've had the experience of putting my heart and soul into a certain book and then having it, and then you'll say, oh, let's never publish a book again on Memorial Weekend, and you learn and live and all that. But it can be quite saddening when a prized project flames out like that. So recommitment is incredibly important. The punchline of the criticism story is that it took us a few years, maybe 3 to 5 years, I don't know, I don't remember now, but a long time to make good on that commitment. But once we did, I can tell you, for example, we've lived in this particular house, which is kind of like our dream house that we found when in 2000 or so. And so we've been living here for almost 20 years now in this house, and no one has ever said a critical word to the other inside these four walls. Wow. And so it's possible to make good on a big commitment wherever it is, and it may sound like a ridiculously impossible thing to create a relationship which has only positive energy to it, but it can be done. So now that I know it can be done, anybody else could do it too, because it's like the 4-minute mile. If somebody can break it, everybody can break it. Not everybody, but people started breaking it. And so what we're all in life to do, I think, is to expand in abundance and creativity as we expand in our ability to thrive on more and more love and good positive energy in our life. And to the extent that we do that, life is wonderful.
You're such an inspiration. You and your wife. The fact that you can have done that is insane. Nobody, I don't think without you actually of committing to that and saying that, that I would have believed that it ever would have been possible, just as a side note. And so thank you, thank you, thank you. I know we have to start wrapping up because you got a date with golf coming up very, very soon. But I'm going to ask the last question. And I highly recommend getting for everybody else that's listening right now, getting The Big Leap and then getting Joy of Genius. So those two books, it's a prescription for you. You have to read them. But besides buying those books, what is one action listeners can take this week to help move them forward towards their goal of 1 million?
Entertain a wonder question. It'll take you 10 seconds, but it'll change your life. What we call wonder questions are questions that you really would love to know the answer to, and you really don't know the answer to. And so a wonder question that I'd like to leave you with is, how can I spend the majority of my time doing what I most love to do while making my greatest contribution to others? How can I spend the majority of my time doing what I most love to do while also making my largest contribution to others? And then see what happens out of that.
That has changed things for me just from reading the book. I've read it 3 times already for The Big Leap, just so you know. And it's a progress, not perfection thing for me, but I highly recommend everybody, if you're driving, don't write it down, but write that question down, go back, rewind it, write that question down, meditate on it. Thank you so much, Gay. You can find you at Hendricks.com is one of the links, but I know you have quite a few. Where can we find more about you online?
Well, we have our big relationship section of Facebook called Hearts in Harmony, where you can see lots of videos of us and learn about our relationship work. And Hendricks.com will take you off into wherever you need to go to our nonprofit foundation or wherever you would like to learn about. There's all sorts of different resources for you on there.
I just appreciate you and all of your work. I know we've never met before, but you have impacted my life. I so appreciate you coming on the show today. Thank you so much.
Many blessings to you and all your subscribers. Thanks.
If you enjoy this show, I would really appreciate your wonderful words of feedback. Go leave me a review. I would love a rating, whatever you can do in the time that you've got. I would so appreciate it.